I hit the step hard. The impact stole my breath before the pain arrived. My skin scraped against concrete, and I felt the sting spread across my palm like fire. For a second, there was silence, the kind that happens right before everything changes. Then Zachary's laugh cut through the air. It wasn't a laugh of concern. It was sharp, deliberate, and it gave permission. Within seconds, the rest of them joined in. My aunts. My uncles. My cousins. Even my parents' faces twisted into confused smiles, like they were waiting to see if this was part of some joke I hadn't caught. I looked up from the concrete, my hands shaking. Zachary stood at the top of the stairs, watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. His smile was cold and certain, like he'd just confirmed something he'd always suspected about me, that I was clumsy, careless, someone to laugh at. "That's what happens when you don't watch where you're going," he called down, his voice smooth as honey. I realized in that moment, lying on the ground with my own blood on my skin, that this wasn't an accident. The timing was too perfect. The laughter was too coordinated. My brother had pushed me down those stairs, and everyone in that house had just watched it happen. My name is Naomi Whitaker, and in that moment, I understood the fall was planned. I stood up alone. No one moved to help me. Dust clung to my dress. Blood pooled in my palm. Caleb smiled like he'd won something precious. I realized they were all waiting to see how I'd react. Would I cry? Would I scream? I didn't give them anything. I walked to the sink, washed the blood away, and returned. My voice was steady. "I'm fine. Just slipped." The relief on their faces was instant. They wanted a simple explanation. Permission to move past this. What I didn't do was look at Caleb again. Because I already knew what I'd find in his eyes. Confirmation that he'd gotten away with it. That was when I decided to start remembering everything. By nightfall, the story had changed completely. I could hear it happening in the kitchen while I sat upstairs, listening through the vents. "She's always been so clumsy," my mother said, her voice uncertain but trying to convince itself. "Very emotional," my aunt added. "She makes scenes sometimes." That fall was totally her fault, someone else agreed. Naomi wasn't paying attention. I sat in the dark of my room and listened as my fall, my brother's calculated act of violence, became my character flaw. They were rewriting what they'd seen with their own eyes, and they were doing it to protect themselves from the uncomfortable truth, that Zachary had hurt me intentionally, and that made them complicit for laughing. It was easier to blame me. I said nothing during dinner. I watched Zachary sit across from me, eating like nothing had happened, occasionally glancing up to catch my eye and offer the smallest smile. A private smile. A smile that said, "They believed me. They'll always believe me now." I started remembering everything that night. The way he'd positioned himself at the top of the stairs. The split second before he tripped into me. The exact cadence of his laugh. The silence that followed. The way my parents' faces had shifted from confusion to blame. I wrote it all down in a notebook I hid beneath my mattress. Every detail. Every name. Every moment. Because Zachary had just taught me something critical. The person who controls the story controls everything else. And I was going to make sure that never happened to me again. Zachary became the voice of reason overnight. "He's just trying to help," people started saying. He'd started making suggestions about family decisions. What we should do about Grandma's health. Where we should go for the holidays. And people listened. My opinions disappeared. I'd make a suggestion at dinner, and it would hang in the air irrelevantly. Then Zachary would say the same thing, and everyone would nod. "That's a good point. Zachary's right." Decisions started happening without me. The family vacation. I'd suggested the beach. My mother seemed interested. Then Zachary mentioned the mountains, and suddenly the vacation was planned for the Smoky Mountains. No one had asked my opinion again. My name disappeared from conversations. I'd walk into a room and the chatter would continue, but it felt like I was invisible. At the family group chat, my messages were ignored while Zachary's jokes got dozens of reactions. I realized what he'd done. By making me look foolish, by creating this false narrative that I was careless and emotional, he'd positioned himself as the stable one. The trustworthy one. And everyone had believed it. I said nothing. I watched. And I started understanding how power actually worked in my family. It wasn't about being the loudest. It was about controlling the narrative. Doors started closing when I entered them. I'd walk into the kitchen, and my mother would end a conversation abruptly. I'd approach a group of my aunts, and they'd scatter like I'd interrupted something private. But the worst part was when the decisions were made behind those closed doors. I'd learn about major family plans only after they were already final. The anniversary party for my parents. The decision about whether to help my cousin with her move. The money being set aside for my grandmother's care. All decided without me. All communicated to me as a done deal, as if asking my opinion would be an afterthought. I smiled and agreed with every decision, no matter what I actually thought. I learned to nod at the right moments, to make supportive comments, to be the perfect audience for other people's choices. They mistook my compliance for surrender. But I was cataloging everything. I was noticing who closed the doors. Who made the decisions? Who looked uncomfortable when the doors opened again and I was there? I was mapping the power structure of my own family, and I was learning that Zachary sat at the center of it. One afternoon, I overheard my father on the phone with an attorney about Grandma's estate. They were discussing her will. It was supposed to be divided equally among her 3 children. But as I listened, I heard my father mention a new family priority that Zachary had suggested. They hadn't asked me what I thought about any of it. I realized then that by disappearing from the decision-making process, I'd inadvertently lost my voice in what would happen to our family's future. That was when I decided I was done being invisible. I started searching through old folders and boxes in the basement. Duplicates didn't match originals. Names were adjusted between versions. Signatures looked slightly off. Someone had been busy rewriting family history. I documented everything with my phone. Pictures of the originals. Pictures of the copies. Notes about the discrepancies. My hands were shaking as I did it, partly from anger and partly from the realization that this went deeper than just the stairs. I found a document from 5 years ago about Grandma's original will. According to the copy in our family files, Grandma had decided to give her jewelry to my mother and my aunt equally. But the original, the one I found in a locked box in Grandma's own handwriting, said something different. It mentioned specific pieces for each granddaughter, including me. The copy had been changed. My name had been removed. I found another document about a family business investment. My grandfather had invested money for his 3 children and their kids. The original showed 7 beneficiaries. The copy showed only 4. 3 names had been removed. My mother's name was there. My uncle's name was there. But my name wasn't. I sat in that basement, surrounded by altered documents, and I finally understood what Caleb had been doing. He was rewriting the family's entire past to serve his present. And no one else had noticed because no one else had been paying attention. I mentioned a memory at dinner about 3 weeks later. Something small. I was talking about a family trip to the lake when I was 7, and how Caleb had helped me learn to swim. It was the best day, I said, smiling at the memory. You were so patient with me. Everyone went quiet. Then they all shook their heads. That didn't happen, my mother said carefully, like she was correcting a child. You never went to the lake as a family, my aunt added. Caleb looked confused. I don't remember that at all, Naomi. Are you sure you're not mixing it up with something else? I felt my confidence waver for just a second. Was I wrong? Had I imagined it? But no. I remembered it clearly. The water. The sun. Caleb's hand supporting my back. The moment I touched the bottom of the lake and realized I could do this. I'm sure, I said quietly. I remember it. Caleb smiled gently, the smile of someone being patient with someone unstable. I think maybe you're remembering a dream or something you saw in a movie. That never happened. My father nodded in agreement. My cousins looked at me with a mixture of pity and concern. But in that moment, I saw the rehearsal in their eyes. They'd discussed this. They'd decided what version of my memory was allowed to exist. And they were all delivering the same line. I saw the coordination. I saw the lie. And I realized that if they could collectively gaslight me about something I knew was real, then the documents I'd found weren't random mistakes. They were deliberate alterations, and everyone in that room, even my parents, might already know about them. The question was, why was Caleb worth protecting? A relative pulled me aside 3 days later. It was my cousin Brian, my mother's brother's son. "Can we talk outside?" he asked quietly. We sat on the back porch. James looked uncomfortable. "I don't remember it the way he says," James whispered. "That memory you mentioned at dinner. The lake. I was there too." My heart started beating faster. "You were?" "Yeah. I remember you being scared at first, and Caleb being rough with you. He got frustrated and told you that you were stupid for being afraid." James's hands were shaking. Fear followed every word. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I know what he does," James said quietly. "I moved away because I couldn't handle it anymore. He's done this to others before you." He didn't stay long. He went back inside. But doubt had entered the room. For the first time, I had confirmation that I wasn't crazy. That this wasn't just me being emotional or dramatic. I stopped reacting after that. I became quiet. I watched who echoed Zachary and who stayed silent. I noted every time someone defended him without being asked. I tracked which family members seemed uncomfortable but said nothing. Power sat with repetition. The more Zachary said something, the more true it became. Truth wasn't about what actually happened anymore. Truth was about what the majority had agreed to believe. But I noticed something else. The people who stayed silent weren't always silent because they believed him. Some were silent because they were afraid. My uncle, Zachary's father, never contradicted him. But I'd catch him watching Zachary with a look that was almost fearful. My grandmother would sometimes start to say something and then stop. Once, she looked directly at me and mouthed, "I'm sorry." My mother changed the subject every time I brought up something that contradicted Zachary's version. Not because she didn't know better, but because she couldn't handle the conflict. And my father, he just checked out. He read the newspaper during family conversations. He stayed late at work. Truth waited patiently in all those silences. It didn't need to shout. It was already there, hiding in the things no one was saying. I just had to be patient enough to find it. Zachary bragged about how easy things were now. He said it to one of his friends on the phone, not knowing I could hear him from the next room. "She doesn't even fight back anymore," he said, laughing. "It's actually boring now. There's no challenge. She just accepts everything I tell her." He was talking about me like I was a problem he'd already solved. "The thing is," he continued, "once you control the narrative, you control everything. People believe what they want to believe. And if you're consistent enough, they'll believe you over their own memories." He was proud of himself. That was the thing that struck me hardest. He wasn't just lying to us. He was celebrating the fact that he'd convinced us to accept the lies. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. But I noted the time. The exact phrasing. The confidence in his voice. The arrogance. Arrogance always leaves footprints, and he was walking everywhere without caution. I realized in that moment that Zachary didn't think I was a threat anymore. He'd already won. In his mind, the game was over, and he'd been declared the victor. He'd pushed me down the stairs, rewritten the narrative, isolated me from the family, and convinced everyone that I was the problem. What he didn't understand was that he'd just shown me exactly how to prove he was lying. Because he'd done it on the phone. And my house had an old landline with a recorder in the basement that my grandfather had installed 20 years ago for emergencies. A recorder that my father had never removed. I asked one simple question out loud at the family dinner 2 weeks later. We were all sitting around the table, and Zachary was talking about a charity event he'd supposedly organized. He was making himself sound incredible, the vision, the execution, the results. The whole family was nodding along, hanging on his words. "Zachary," I said calmly, "didn't your co-worker Raymond organize that event?" The table went silent. Zachary answered fast, and completely wrong. "No, I organized it. Raymond just helped me coordinate some logistics." But I'd already checked. I'd called the charity directly. I'd asked to speak to the event coordinator. It was Raymond. Zachary had done almost nothing. A pause followed. Just a beat. A fraction of a second where the truth tried to surface. And someone frowned. It was my aunt. Just a small frown, almost invisible. But I saw it. She'd noticed the lie. She'd caught the inconsistency between what Zachary was claiming and what made sense. Zachary quickly pivoted, shifting the conversation to something else. But the damage was done. The spell had cracked, just barely, just enough for one other person to notice that something didn't add up. That's all I needed. Zachary cornered me privately that night. He found me in the hallway outside my room and blocked my path. "Stop confusing people," he said, his voice calm and steady. "The thing you did at dinner. That was inappropriate." "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my expression neutral. "You know what I mean. You're trying to make me look bad by asking loaded questions. It's not going to work." I looked down at my feet, like I was ashamed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I just misunderstood." "You're right. I'm sorry." My apology was soft, convincing, performed with just the right amount of contrition. Zachary relaxed immediately. His jaw unclenched. His shoulders dropped. He even put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was supposed to feel comforting but felt like ownership. "It's okay," he said. "Just be more careful. You have a tendency to say things that confuse people. It's one of the things you need to work on." He walked away, completely satisfied that he'd intimidated me back into silence. What he didn't realize was that his warning had given me a crucial piece of information. He was worried. If he wasn't worried, he wouldn't have needed to warn me. If he was completely secure in his position, he wouldn't have cared about one small question at dinner. His concern was my advantage. I compared stories quietly over the next few weeks. I'd ask different family members about events, dropping them casually into conversation. "Remember when?" and letting them fill in the blanks. No two versions matched. My mother told me that Zachary had organized the family camping trip last summer. My uncle said it was Zachary and my father together. My grandmother said my father had organized it, and Zachary had just shown up. I asked Zachary directly. He said he'd organized it entirely, with my father just helping with logistics. 4 different stories. 4 different people. All claiming Zachary had played a major role, but none of the details aligned. Even Zachary couldn't keep them straight anymore. I caught him contradicting himself twice in the same week. First he said he'd paid for the beach house rental. Then he said my uncle had paid and he'd just coordinated. The details shifted depending on who he was talking to and what impression he was trying to give. The lie was getting heavy. It was bending under its own weight. And I was documenting every crack. An old message surfaced on my mother's laptop. She'd left it open while she was in the kitchen, and I saw an email thread from 3 years ago that had been forwarded to me by mistake. Timestamps intact. Unedited. Unmistakable. It was an email from Zachary to my father about a family decision, something about Grandma's medical care. In the email, Zachary was being extremely dismissive of my mother's concerns. He called her irrational and hysterical and suggested that his judgment on medical matters was more reliable because he was more logical. But here's the thing, everything that happened after that email, my family had told me was my fault. They'd told me that I was the one who was being irrational about Grandma's care. They'd used the exact same language, hysterical, irrational, emotional, to describe my concerns. But it wasn't me. It was my mother. And Zachary had weaponized her words against all of us. I reread the email 3 times, my hand shaking. This was the hinge. This was the moment everything could change. Because this email proved that Zachary deliberately misrepresented people's concerns. He didn't just gaslight us about past events. He actively reframed what people said and did to make himself look better and everyone else look worse. I saved it. I copied it. I printed it. This was evidence. Real, undeniable evidence. Zachary joked at a family gathering that I'd finally moved on from being upset about the fall. She's accepted that it was her fault, he said, and they laughed again. The same laugh as that first day on the stairs. But I wasn't moving on. I was preparing. I already had confirmations lined up. Brian had agreed to speak if I needed him to, though he was terrified. I had the recordings. I had the documents from the basement. I had the email. I had the contradictions documented. I had witness testimony from Grandma, even if she was sometimes unclear. I had my own journal with every detail of the fall, written the day it happened. He was celebrating too early. He thought the game was over because I'd stopped fighting. He thought my silence meant surrender. He had no idea that every moment of quiet observation had been gathering ammunition. I smiled when he made his joke. I laughed along with everyone else. And inside, I was already seeing how this would end. Someone finally admitted they were pressured. It was my mother. She pulled me into her room one afternoon and closed the door. Her hands were shaking. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. "I don't remember it the way Zachary says. That memory at dinner. The lake. I was there. You did go to the lake. You were scared, and you learned to swim. It happened exactly the way you described it." I felt tears spring to my eyes. "Why didn't you say something?" "Because Zachary told me not to," she whispered. "He said that if I backed you up, he'd tell your father that I was unstable. He said he'd convince him that I was a bad influence on you. He said he had evidence." "What evidence?" "I don't know. I never asked. I was just scared." My mother looked so small in that moment, so diminished by fear of her own son. "I'll tell the truth if I'm not alone," she said finally. "But I need to know you have support. I need to know I won't be the only one saying this." "You won't be," I promised. And I meant it. They wouldn't be. Zachary pushed for a decisive family meeting. He called it a family summit in the group chat, like this was something professional and important. "Let's settle this once and for all," he announced. "I think it's time we addressed the elephant in the room." The elephant in the room was me, obviously. Me and the fact that I kept asking questions and didn't seem to be accepting the narrative he'd constructed. "We should all come together as a family and work through this," he wrote. "For Naomi's sake. So she can get the support she needs." Support. Like I was the broken one. I agreed instantly to the meeting. Zachary sent a thumbs up emoji to my response, completely satisfied. He thought he'd won. He thought this meeting would be the final nail in my credibility coffin. He mistook my speed for weakness. But I'd been waiting for this moment since I found those altered documents in the basement. I'd been preparing for this since the moment I heard him bragging on the phone. I'd organized every piece of evidence, every contradiction, every witness statement. I was ready. I organized everything with meticulous care. No speeches. No drama. Just records. Dates. Witnesses. I created a timeline of events, color-coded by category. Falls and injuries. Alterations to documents. Contradictory statements. Misattributed accomplishments. Instances of gaslighting. I arranged all the physical evidence in order. The original documents from the basement, the copies with alterations marked in highlighter, the email from 3 years ago, photographs of the family records with dates and name changes circled. I had Brian prepare a written statement about his own experience with Zachary's narrative manipulation. I had my mother ready to speak. I had my aunt's testimony about the small frown at dinner. I had Grandma's doctor ready to provide information about who had actually made decisions about her care. I had the phone recording of Zachary bragging about how easy it was to control the narrative. And I had my own journal, written in my own hand, with every detail of the day Zachary pushed me down the stairs. Silence would do the work. I didn't need to scream or accuse or cry. I just needed to present the facts and let people see the truth. The night before the meeting, I sat in my room surrounded by evidence, and I felt something I hadn't felt since the fall: peace. The meeting happened on a Saturday afternoon in our living room. Everyone was there: my parents, Zachary, both of my aunts, my uncle, my grandmother, Brian, and my cousins. Zachary started by outlining his concerns about me. About how I seemed confused about recent events. How I was asking inappropriate questions that were creating family discord. How everyone needed to help me understand that I sometimes misremember things. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He positioned himself as the concerned family member trying to help the troubled one. And then I asked one question. Zachary, can you explain the alterations to Grandma's original will? The room went silent. Zachary's face went pale. What alterations? The ones in the basement, where names were removed from the original and replaced with different names in the copy. I have pictures. I placed the photographs on the coffee table. Zachary's jaw tightened. He reached for the photos, but my father got there first. He picked them up, studied them, and his entire body went rigid. Zachary, my father said slowly. What is this? That's not what it looks like, Zachary started. Those documents are old. They might have been altered years ago by someone else. The alterations are in your handwriting, I said quietly. I had a handwriting expert confirm it. I hadn't, but the threat hung in the air. Zachary's face darkened. You're twisting this. You're taking things out of context. Then explain the context, I said. And he couldn't. Questions followed. Rapid fire. From my father, from my aunts, from my uncle. Why would you alter Grandma's will? When did this happen? What else have you changed? Does Grandma know about this? Zachary talked faster, louder. His words started tripping over each other. He contradicted what he'd said 5 minutes earlier. He blamed various family members for things I had documented evidence of him doing. And I stayed still. I said nothing. My hands remained folded in my lap. My expression remained calm. Every time Zachary looked at me for support or validation, he found nothing. Just quiet observation. Silence has weight. That's something I learned that afternoon. Silence doesn't give people anywhere to hide. It doesn't give them ammunition. It doesn't give them an enemy to fight against. Zachary was fighting against the quiet, and he was losing. I placed one document on the table. The email from 3 years ago. Original. Untouched. With the timestamps and sender information fully visible. No accusations. No dramatic reveal. Just truth. My mother picked it up and read it. Her face crumpled. My father read it next. My aunts passed it between them. Zachary, my father said quietly. Is this your email? I don't remember writing that, Zachary said. It's from your email address, my aunt said. There's your signature at the bottom. I was young. I didn't understand things as well back then. But that wasn't a real answer, and everyone knew it. I placed another document down. The phone call transcript. The one I'd had transcribed from the recording, with timestamps and context. That's my private phone call. Zachary said. That's illegal. It's recorded in your own home, my father said. Nothing about it is illegal. Document after document. Evidence after evidence. Nothing dramatic. Nothing accusatory. Just a presentation of facts. Zachary explained. Then re-explained. His stories tangled around each other like vines, impossible to untangle. He said he'd altered the documents to protect Grandma's privacy. He said the email was taken out of context. He said the phone call was him being sarcastic. He said I'd been manipulating him all along. No one interrupted me, because I wasn't speaking. They were seeing. They were watching Zachary contradict himself. They were watching him blame everyone else. They were watching him get more and more panicked as he realized that the narrative he'd so carefully constructed was crumbling. My grandmother looked at him with such sadness. My father looked betrayed. My aunts looked angry. The laughter that had welcomed my fall was gone. In its place was silence and disappointment. Zachary kept talking, but no one was listening anymore. He'd already lost them. I spoke once. Calm. Precise. I'm not here to punish you, I said. I'm here because I deserve to exist in this family without being manipulated or rewritten. I deserve to have my experiences respected. And I deserve to live in a house where the truth matters more than protecting someone's image. I didn't accuse. I clarified. The fall wasn't an accident. The documents were altered deliberately. The stories were changed to make you look better and everyone else look worse. I documented all of it because I needed to understand if I was going crazy. I found out I wasn't. The contrast did the damage. Not anger. Not drama. Just clarity. An apology landed in my lap. Not a real one. Not the kind where Caleb took responsibility. It was the kind where he said, "I'm sorry if you felt hurt by my actions," which isn't an apology at all. It's a non-answer that shifts blame to the person hurt. But I didn't need his apology. I needed the rest of my family to see him clearly. And they did. No one laughed now. Zachary was avoided at family gatherings. Not confronted. Not yelled at. Just quietly avoided. People would leave rooms when he entered. Conversations would shift. No one made him the center of anything anymore. Power drained quietly from him. That hurt more than shouting ever could. Because he'd built his entire identity on being the favorite, the smart one, the reliable one. And now he was just the person no one trusted. My mother started standing up to him. My father got a therapist to work through how Zachary's manipulation had affected him. My aunt took steps to legally reinstate the original version of Grandma's will. Brian came home more often. And my name appeared in conversations again, not as a warning or a joke, but as someone whose opinion mattered. I left without reclaiming anything. I didn't demand apologies. I didn't ask for restitution. I didn't need Zachary to understand what he'd done or why it was wrong. I just walked away. I wasn't erased anymore. I was freed. The fall that broke me had taught me something powerful, that sometimes the only way to win is to step outside the game entirely. To stop fighting for a narrative and start living in the truth instead. Zachary spent his life building a story in which he was the hero and everyone else was supporting cast. I spent 3 months documenting the holes in that story. And when it finally collapsed, it didn't matter what he did next. The lie was too heavy. And my silence was too strong. My brother never saw it coming. And that was exactly the way I wanted it.